Jonah has been rescued from the sea by the great fish and spat out upon the land, and he has preached to Nineveh about the impending doom that God has planned for them. But they humble themselves and repent in sackcloth and ashes, and God relents of the destruction. Jonah is angry because he did this, and Jonah says that he knew he would do this because he is a God of mercy and abounding in steadfast love. Now Jonah is angry and wants to die, and he goes outside of the city to the east of the city. Going east might be seen as going away from God's presence, and he sets up a booth and sits down to watch what's going to happen there. The booth can remind us of the Feast of Tabernacles and God's tabernacling with Israel in the wilderness. It is a sign of God's presence, which is a little ironic, since Jonah has so often been fleeing his presence. Jonah 4, verse 6. Now the Lord appointed a plant, and made it come up over Jonah, that it might be a shade over his head, to save him from his discomfort. So Jonah was exceedingly glad because of the plant. But when dawn came up the next day, God appointed a worm that attacked the plant, so that it withered. When the sun rose, God appointed a scorching east wind, and the sun beat down on the head of Jonah, so that he was faint. And he asked that he might die, and said, "It is better for me to die than to live." Here again we see that God is in charge of everything. God appointed the storm and the fish. Now he's appointed the plant to grow up in a day, and he has appointed the scorching east wind to destroy it. One translation broke for me the entire book of Jonah wide open, and it's when I saw a translation that didn't say gourd, but said vine. John Calvin writes that there is a lot of argument over what the plant might be, and the Bible just doesn't tell us. People were trying to speculate about certain plants like ivy that could grow up quickly in a day. But the rate of natural growth is irrelevant to us because God has appointed this plant to grow up in a day. So it can be any plant, but no matter what it is, whether ivy or a gourd, it's a vine. And when I saw the word vine, suddenly the whole book took on a new meaning to me, because we know that Israel is the vine. It's God's vineyard. It's a vine that he plants. Even in the New Testament, Israel is still a plant, often a fig tree, and Jesus sees that it's a fig tree that bears no fruit, and that's going to be snatched up and burned. This little Jonah passage is echoing the prophetic curse of Deuteronomy 28, in fact. In 28:39, Moses tells Israel that you shall plant vineyards and dress them, but you shall neither drink of the wine nor gather the grapes, for the worm shall eat them. You shall have olive trees throughout all your territory, but you shall not anoint yourself with the oil, for your olives shall drop off. Verse 45, all these curses shall come upon you and pursue you and overtake you till you are destroyed, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord your God, to keep his commandments and his statutes that he commanded you. Verse 49, the Lord will bring a nation against you from far away, from the end of the earth, swooping down like the eagle, a nation whose language you do not understand. Verse 50, a hard-faced nation who shall not respect the old or show mercy to the young. In Deuteronomy here we see all our elements. We see the vine, we see it eaten by a worm, just as in Jonah. The worm comes from inside. In Isaiah 66 we see that worms eat the dead carcasses. We also see the worms eating King Agrippa as well in the book of Acts. They signal internal death and decomposition. And this, of course, is what happens in Israel when they're rotting from the inside, from the bad shepherds, the bad teachings, and the idolatry that they so often succumb to. Deuteronomy tells us that God will bring nations from afar off. These are the east winds that the prophets always show coming against Israel. The east winds are Babylon and Assyria. So in Jonah, again, we see the prophecy of what's going to happen to Israel. The plant has grown up in one day, which God has said he did with Israel. What God is like him who took a nation and birthed it in a day? There's a future fulfillment that we see where Israel will come out of Babylon and return to the land and be birthed in a day again. Springing to life is a resurrection in Ezekiel 37 in the valley of the dry bones. We can probably see Israel growing up in one day in the future as well. In fact, of course, many prophecy pundits think this happened in 1948. There are many places that we find out that Israel is a vine. Hosea 10 tells us, Israel is a luxuriant vine that yields its fruit. The more his fruit increased, the more altars he built. Notice that the better Israel is doing and the more comfort Israel has, the further away it goes from God. This is the image we've seen in Amos and even here in Jonah, when it's the storm at the sea that brings Jonah closer to God. In Hosea 11:5, we see this vine tied to Assyria again, and we get our theme, the return to God. Hosea 11:5, they shall not return to the land of Egypt, but Assyria shall be their king, because they have refused to return to me. Jonah went down into the sea as though going to Egypt, but he was rescued and thrown back onto the land where he went to preach to Assyria. But Assyria is going to survive this judgment, and in fact they will come and destroy Israel in the end. Hosea 11:11. They shall come trembling like birds from Egypt, and like doves. These are like Jonahs again, from the land of Assyria. And I will return them to their homes, declares the Lord. We see this in Jonah as he's run away from God, like Israel has done, and he returns to him after the fish spits him out. He is the silly dove of Israel. They attempt, but will not go down to Egypt. Egypt in the Bible is Leviathan, the sea creature, the Nile River. They will go to Nineveh for help, and then into exile. We get another extended commentary on this from Ezekiel in chapter 19 as he writes in the Babylonian exile. 19:1. And you, take up a lamentation for the princes of Israel, and say, what was your mother? A lioness, among lions she crouched. Verse 7. And seized their widows, he laid waste their cities, and the land was appalled, and all who were in it, at the sound of his roaring. Then the nations set against him from provinces on every side. They spread their net over him. He was taken in their pit. With hooks they put him in a cage, and brought him to the king of Babylon. Here's the exile of Israel. They brought him into custody. Israel is a vine in verse 12. But the vine was plucked up in fury, cast down to the ground. The east wind dried up its fruit. The east wind destroys Israel here, just as Babylon has done in the time of Ezekiel, and as Assyria will do after this prophecy of Jonah. Ezekiel continues in verse 12, they were stripped off and withered. As for its strong stem, fire consumed it. In Jeremiah 8, God is looking for grapes on his vine. When I would gather them, declares the Lord, there are no grapes on the vine, nor figs on the fig tree. Even the leaves are withered, and what I gave them has passed away from them. The vine with no grapes is seen equivalent to a fig tree with no figs. This is what Jesus has found in the Gospels, in Matthew and Mark, when he curses the fig tree for having no figs. This is Israel. This is the temple cult of the Pharisees, the Judaism of his day that's bearing no fruit and that will be judged, thrown down, and cast into the fire. Micah 7 verse 1 tells us the same thing. Woe is me, for I have become as when the summer fruit has been gathered, as when the grapes have been gleaned. There is no cluster to eat, no first-ripe fig that my soul desires. The godly has perished from the earth, and there is no one upright among mankind. They all lie in wait for blood, and each hunts the other with a net. Their hands are on what is evil, to do it well. The prince and the judge ask for a bribe, and the great man utters the evil desire of his soul. Thus they weave it together. Verse 4. The best of them is like a briar, the most upright of them a thorn hedge. The day of your watchment, of your punishment has come. Now the confusion is at hand. Joel 1, which we've seen many times alluded to and pointed back to, especially when it comes to the question in Joel 2, whether or not God will relent of his disaster. Joel 1:6 tells us, for a nation has come up against my land, powerful and beyond number. Its teeth are lion's teeth, and it has the fangs of a lioness. Verse 7, it has laid waste my vine and splintered my fig tree. It has stripped off their bark and thrown it down. Their branches are made white. Again, we see that Assyria, or perhaps Babylon, comes against Israel or Judah and destroys it. They come in as the east wind, and we see that Israel is a vine thrown down, or a fig tree without fruit. So we've seen plenty of evidence that Israel is the vine. Isaiah 5 talks about God's vineyard, and how he hedged it and protected it, and then he had to take down his hedge and let it be destroyed. We also see in these prophets that the east wind is Assyria or Babylon. Hosea 12, for instance, tells us, Ephraim feeds on the wind and pursues the east wind all day long. They multiply falsehood and violence. They make a covenant with Assyria. Going to Nineveh, they pursue the east wind. This is the east wind that devours the vine, Israel, when Nineveh is spared. Hosea 12:13 says, by a prophet the Lord brought Israel up from Egypt, and by a prophet he was guarded. Ephraim has given bitter provocation, so his Lord will leave his blood guilt on him, and will repay him for his disgraceful deeds. We've seen in Jonah that he was brought up from Egypt, brought out of the water. Egypt is the Leviathan. The next chapter of Hosea 13, we see the Lord's relentless judgment on Israel. When Ephraim spoke, there was trembling. He was exalted in Israel, but he incurred guilt through Baal, and died. Verse 2, and now they sin more and more, and make for themselves metal images, idols, skillfully making their silver, all of them the work of craftsmen. It is said of them, those who offer human sacrifice kiss calves. We see they worship still Jeroboam's calves, and they sacrificed their children to Moloch, as Manasseh did when he sacrificed his own children before Assyria took him into captivity in Babylon. This is one of the instances where God relented from his punishment, when the subject of his prophecy humbled himself and repented. Bringing it together a little bit more, Hosea 13:14 shows us that Jonah is the sign of Christ. I shall ransom them from the power of Sheol. I shall redeem them from death. O death, where are your plagues? O Sheol, where is your sting? This is about Israel being redeemed. Jonah in the belly of the fish is a type of this. The New Testament uses this phrase to show us that this is all about Jesus. Continuing though in 15, though he may flourish among his brothers, the east wind, the wind of the Lord shall come, rising from the wilderness, and his fountain shall dry up, his spring shall be parched. It shall strip his treasury of every precious thing. Jeremiah 4:11 continues with this theme of the nations of the east being the wind. At that time it shall be said to this people and to Jerusalem, a hot wind from the bare heights in the desert, toward the daughter of my people, not to winnow or cleanse. 12. A wind too full for this comes for me. Now it is I who speak in judgment upon them. Warn the nations that he is coming. Announce to Jerusalem, besiegers come from a distant land. They shout against the cities of Judah. Regarding the vine, the prophetic cycle always ends in the hope of returning from exile, returning to God and prospering in the new creation. Hosea 14 verse 7 continues, they shall return and dwell beneath my shadow. Notice that God has put Jonah in the comfort under the shadow of his vine, where he rejoices as he's supposed to during the Feast of Booths or Tabernacles. They shall flourish like the grain, they shall blossom like the vine, their fame shall be like the wine of Lebanon. Verse 9, whoever is wise, let him understand these things. Whoever is discerning, let him know them. For the ways of the Lord are right, and the upright walk in them, but transgressors stumble in them. The theme of Jonah has been obeying God, doing what he says, the way the wind, the storm, the fish, the vine, and even the worm do. But Jonah has not done that. He has been wayward Israel, who must be chastised and brought back nearer to God. God relents in his punishment of Nineveh, and often will relent in his punishment of Israel. He'll set them up in comfort and in shade, but because they continued not to walk in his ways, and continued toward idolatry, continuing to look toward Egypt, and leaning on Egypt instead of God, he sends the worm, the rot from within them, that will destroy their vines, that will destroy Israel itself, and allow it to be dried up by the east wind of Nineveh, or the east wind of Babylon later on. He's raised Israel up in a day as a nation. He did this when he brought it out of Egypt, and he will do so again when he brings her back from Babylon, but their sins will cause them to go into exile again. In Jesus' day, they finally killed Jesus, the son and heir of the vineyard owner, who comes to check on the produce. They kill him and throw him out of the vineyard. But when he comes in Revelation, he destroys the city. He throws down the city that rejected and crucified him, sending them into exile one more time. In our own hearts, we are in the kingdom of Satan. He rescues us and makes us a nation to himself, bringing us out of this spiritual Babylon and making us in one day a royal kingdom of priests who will be raised up in the last day with him.